Welcome back to the program. Today we have French President Emmanuel Macron at the White House for a meeting with Donald Trump. And the most important topic, of course, of this meeting is going to be the future of the Ukrainian conflict and where Europe is going to stand in this, attempt from the Trump administration to bring an end to the conflict and their negotiation with Russia. And of course, President Macron is not just representing France, is somewhat representing the U.S. perspective and bringing the European perspective to Washington, trying to handle Donald Trump and trying to see what they can get for Europe when it comes to the foreign policy of Donald Trump. And of course, the Europeans are probably pretty stressed at this moment because of the stance of Donald Trump and the way he usually handles things. And we're going to see in this press conference is there, a common ground between the French president here and Donald Trump, or if this is a more difficult situation for the Europeans dealing with Donald Trump in this negotiation process with the Russians for seeking an end to the Ukrainian conflict. So let's have a listen at the press conference here after the meeting between the two.
And over the past few days, we have one main objective, which is the geopolitical situation. Mr. President, I really wish to thank you for making changes to your schedule to meet with us so quickly. I think we've made very substantive steps forward during our discussions, and this is a major step in what we're experiencing today. We had a video conference with all of the G7 leaders, which was an opportunity for us to discuss this matter 3 days after the Russian war in Ukraine and to express our support for President Zelensky to the Ukrainian people, but also to speak and share about our desire for a lasting peace. This is what we have spoken about very forcibly over the past few weeks. Over the past few hours, and as you mentioned this, Mr. President, we've been able to see a few things take shape. First of all, allow me to commend you on your decision to work with President Zelensky and to conclude this agreement that's so important for the U.S. and Ukraine on rare earths, critical minerals, but also having substantive conversations with President Zelensky during this key phase of achieving this deal, which is a major commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty, and I think that's very commendable. We also have a shared desire to build peace.
So let's talk a little bit about what we heard from Macron here at the press conference with Donald Trump, and very different from the TikTok news conference that he had done prior to leaving and departing France to the United States, where he was saying that he was sort of going to hold Trump's feet to the fire, that he was going to tell him how to deal with Ukraine. And now that Emmanuel Macron is at the White House, now he's doing exactly the opposite, praising Donald Trump for his leadership in handling the situation in Ukraine and sort of trying to, navigating this fine line between showing, the resolve of the Europeans to want to continue this war in Ukraine and yet being somewhat subservient to the U.S. and Donald Trump and pretending that they are on the same page when they clearly aren't.
To have a truce, a peace, and be able to measure that and then structure our discussions on that basis. France and several other European countries, along with Ukraine, are hard at work to build this lasting peace with very specific points, including security guarantees, the territories that belong to Ukraine, the issue of reconstruction, the economy, and critical minerals. We've been able to go into the details of those proposals. The third area of progress, which really mark a turning point is the fact that we were able to talk about the details of the security guarantees. And the president has shown this over the past few days, and he said so a moment ago. We want peace. He wants peace. We want peace swiftly, but we don't want an agreement that is weak. The fact that there are Europeans that are ready to engage, to provide for these security guarantees, and now there's a clear...
I mean, this is just hilarious because right now he's saying, oh, we want peace, but just a few months ago when Joe Biden was the president, they were saying literally there will never be peace with Russia as long as Vladimir Putin is the president. And of course, that's what we're saying now. Now that it's a different outlook for the US, then now Europe has to find a way to sort of backtrack and sell a totally different vision. And that's difficult, of course, but that's the reason why, all these people are really actors, like all these globalists are actors. Macron is an actor, Trudeau is an actor, Zelensky is an actor, because they are here to actually sell you this script. They're there to convince you that there is actually this political willpower in these countries that are essentially just doing what they're told. And here it's the perfect demonstration, really, of Macron saying one thing before coming to Washington. Then he gets there, and now he's singing Trump's song, and then he's going to go back to Europe, and who knows what he's going to do when that is the case. Will he actually carry, the water for Washington, or will then he will start to, have his own ideas, and, once he goes back to Europe and he talks to his counterparts in Europe, will we then see a totally different European mindset as we've been seeing, yesterday with the German elections, and the Germans saying, okay, now we want to be independent from the United States. Will Macron go back to Europe and then start to essentially say, oh, well, actually, what we're saying, we wanted peace when I was in Washington, but now I've talked to my new German counterpart, I talked to Zelensky, and this peace is not going to happen because we don't accept, the deal that Donald Trump is making without us, basically.
There are a number of areas where they are obviously expressing solidarity between France and the United States. And then there are a number of areas that are a little bit fuzzy in terms of what the U.S. commitment would look like, given the fact that, as we heard from President Trump several times, the United States has already committed $350 billion to the cause of security for Ukraine. So with that, let's bring in KT McFarland, former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump, now board member at CPAC. KT, great to see you. Give me a little bit of your reaction to what you're hearing here, what stands out, and what has evolved in the U.S.-France relationship with the new Trump presidency.
What occurred to me is that it sounds really good, but if you look at the details, President Macron kept talking about security guarantees.
That's right.
True, the European nations will bring troops, but to guarantee the security. The problem in the past is we never had a guarantee of security. President Trump didn't talk about security guarantees. He talked about a lot of other things. He talked about investment opportunities, about having the rare earth minerals, which would bring the United States in an economic security relationship with Ukraine. But to me, they're talking past it, because on one hand, if President Macron is talking about putting troops in Ukraine, European troops, maybe American troops, I don't think President Trump's going to put American troops anyplace. But when he's talking about that, it's really like the equivalent of a backdoor version of how do you get into NATO, right? We're going to put troops on the Russian border. President Trump is talking differently. He's talking about an economic investment, that if the United States is heavily involved in developing Ukraine's resources, its rare earth minerals, what does that mean? Think about it. It means that there'll be American engineers, American miners, American businessmen, American bankers in Ukraine, in eastern Ukraine. To me, that's an even stronger deterrent in a lot of ways than troops, because if there's a strong U.S.-Ukraine economic relationship going forward, not only does it allow Ukraine to prosper and win the peace, but it's a heck of a deterrent for any Russians who might want to go across that border again. And who's the first thing they're going to see? American engineers and business
Yeah.
interests?
All right, this woman, I don't know what's wrong with her left eye. She has like her left eye half closed like this, and she's absolutely talking nonsense. This completely, pointless discussion that they're having there. And of course, what's going to happen now is that this war is going to end one way or another. And either the Europeans are going to sort of play along and go along with the peace process, or the US is going to disengage and they're going to leave the Europeans alone trying to fight this war with Ukraine against Russia, and they're going to get steamrolled. And, the defeat is sort of unavoidable here for Ukraine. Now, it's more going to be a way of negotiation. And how do you save face for both the US, NATO, and Europe having confronted Russia on Ukrainian territory and having failed at all their objectives, while the Russians have essentially completed all their objectives? Their main objective, of course, was to secure Crimea and Sevastopol, which is the port that they have, and access to the Black Sea, control of the Black Sea. And they have done so. And they have done so, of course, since 2014, when they seized Crimea, and now with the Donetsk, the Donbass area that they've taken and incorporated in the Russian Federation. Now they control the land bridge that reaches Crimea. So essentially now they've secured Crimea for the long run, and that was their main objective since the beginning of the war. Not only that, but of course they've secured the areas of Ukraine that holds the most rare earth minerals that are of course very important for technology and weapon manufacturing. And that's of course one of the reasons why this war started also in the first place, because Crimea was always going to be Russian. They were never going to give up control of the Black Sea to NATO. So they're going to fight to the bitter end on the Russian side. But for the US, getting Crimea was never something that was plausible. So, the reason why they went, to this war and supported this war, as Lindsey Graham mentioned it several times, is the $10 trillion in the minerals that are in the Donbass region, in the Donetsk region. And because they knew that Russia wanted to link this land bridge to Crimea, they knew that by sort of starting a conflict in this area, it would make it difficult for Russians to be able to get these territories, and there would be a tremendous financial incentive for the US to, support this war effort of Ukraine. And it is sort of the same motivation. If you remember the Iraq war, back then they were also saying, well, the Iraq war will pay for itself. Iraq has a lot of oil, and we will use this oil to sort of pay ourselves back from the cost of the war, and it will also pay for the reconstruction of Iraq and this and that. And of course, it never turned out like that. We know the cost, several trillions of dollars sunk into this Iraq war, and today Iraq is absolutely nothing like what the plan that they had back then. But we will see now what ends up happening in Ukraine. Let's switch quickly here. Let's go
so how
to
this
CNN,
should play out. I mean, you could hear that in the questions that were
being
being asked to both of these world leaders, but also in how President Macron was answering his thoughts on what this looks like going forward and how this conflict could be resolved. And of course, about the past statements by President Trump when it comes to security guarantees. Because yes, President Trump has made clear he believes it is ultimately going to be the responsibility of Europe. And President Macron acknowledged that, saying that they are they're the ones who are most directly at threat by proximity, of course, to Ukraine. And so in that conversation, though, President Macron also harkened back to 2014 and said that if there are not security guarantees in a deal, then the deal can essentially be not worth very much, and that Putin will essentially tear through that if there are not those deals in place. He was very delicately trying to kind of lay that policy out as he was standing next to President Trump, when he was asked by a French reporter if the United States would pay to help build Ukraine, he talked about, essentially he argued the United States has done enough, and disagreeing in that view of what that next step looks like going forward. And so that is really the question here, because essentially President Macron is trying to message that any deal that does not have those firm, airtight guarantees is not going to be worth a deal. He said they all want one, but a weak deal is not going to beget a lasting peace. And so that's really the question going forward here. And you can just see how different these two leaders are approaching this situation, with President Macron also in the Oval Office making sure to point out that Russia has been the aggressor here, and that Russia bears the ultimate responsibility for what has happened in the last 3 years since this invasion happened. That is all messaging done to President Trump, and he's a world leader who knows him well. They have disagreed and agreed on many things, and you can kind of see that in his answers. As for President Trump making clear that he does believe that they could potentially be on the cusp of getting a deal here.
They look pretty depressed here on CNN, though.
Room inside the Oval Office also earlier was talking about the necessary agreement there. There's still a question of what that looks like, and if they come to that agreement, though, of course, and ultimately what the overall agreement here looks like, and whether these two world leaders are on the same page with whatever the terms of that deal are.
A lot of overview over the course of this press conference, but a lot of details still to be worked out. Caitlin, really appreciate it. I also want to bring in Melissa Bell, who's in Paris, because, look, the French President Emmanuel Macron, he of course is the one standing next to President Trump, but really the beginning, or I would say he represented in some ways a lot of Europe, and saying that Europe is going to be alongside the United States, or the United States needs to be alongside Europe. And I wonder, just there in France, what you have heard from the French over whether he was actually effective in making that case for Europe, and what it will take to convince, I think what is fair to say, a skeptical President Trump to commit in the way that Macron and other leaders would like him to.
Well, certainly you have to remember that this meeting happened in the context of all that happened last week, that blindsiding of Europeans by those talks, by the tone of the American administration going into them, by the abandonment of somewhat Europeans had considered the key concessions that the West might try to seek from Russia as these peace talks began, notably the abandoning of the idea of the potential membership of NATO, of Ukraine in NATO, and then what appeared to be President Trump's determination to get to a peace deal quickly. This visit by Emmanuel Macron was really about reclaiming the narrative, wooing Donald Trump, making clear to the world, and specifically to Vladimir Putin, that the West still stands completely together on these issues. And I think the most interesting part of the meeting was not so much what we just heard in the press conference, but what we heard before the two men spoke during those comments in the Oval Office. At one point, President Trump speaking of the fact that President Zelensky would be coming to the United States, coming to Washington to see him, that rare minerals deal, rare earth and minerals deal was nearly there, that they'd made progress, that he believed it would come through, and that once it had been signed, peace could be restored to Ukraine. President Macron then responded in French, picking up where President Trump had left off, saying what the president means is that all of this is very important, and this re-engagement of Washington within the European side in favor of Ukraine is an important signal to Moscow that lends uncertainty to all that is happening, and that is crucial, to which President Trump replied the French was a beautiful language. Fundamentally, what Emmanuel Macron has managed to do is come here and, both in the comments before and the comments we just heard there, restate the American position, not simply reframing, as he's done consistently over the last 2 weeks, the actual facts of how this war began, that this was a Russian-led invasion, that Russia was the aggressor, that Ukraine was the victim, but reframing the American position itself, even as he stood next to President Trump. And I think that was quite deftly done. Of course, the British Prime Minister arrives later this week, and Europeans will continue to try and maintain that image of the West being on side, and the peace negotiations happening in a coherent, cohesive way, and on the side of Ukraine.
Very interesting.
And here, we see CNN, and Essentially, now all this faction is in a difficult place because, as we said, they need to do a 180 now. They need to turn around. And, Biden and the Biden administration definitely sold Europe a pipe dream that regime change was possible in Russia and that, oh, believe us, we are so competent that we can bring Russia to its knees and we can force Russia to essentially oust Vladimir Putin, and then we'll break it in multiple pieces. And this war in Ukraine, the Ukrainians will be marching on Moscow in just a few months. And very quickly during the war, it became clear that that was not going to be the case. And very much the Europeans were absolutely delusional throughout this whole process. And I don't believe for one second that the Biden administration actually believed what they were saying. They did not believe the lies that they were selling to the Europeans. And of course, this was confirmed with the WikiLeaks cable and Victoria Nuland famously saying F Europe. And, ever since the beginning of this little adventure in Ukraine from the West and the US, it was very clear from the American side that this was going to be a conflict that was going to destroy Europe. And in many ways, they did it purposefully, even though they managed to sell it to the European population and even to the American population and public opinion as a great way to strengthen Europe and to weaken Russia. But as it turned out to be exactly the opposite. How much was planned? How much was unintended consequences? Well, we'll never know because they will never let us know. But like I said, if you just look at the cables from Victoria Nuland, then you know that they knew that it was going to be disastrous consequences for Europe and that the Biden administration clearly did not care. That being said, after a couple of years of that war, before Trump got elected, Victoria Nuland was ousted in the Biden administration. So clearly it did not play out totally the way that they wanted. And perhaps when the Biden administration and the State Department realized that this war has the potential to lead to a destruction of NATO, then they were like, okay, Victoria Nuland, you did something absolutely stupid. We never intended for that to happen. Maybe, we wanted to see if this was going to bring some difficulties, dissension within the EU, and perhaps something we could exploit. But our goal was never to break NATO. And now we're sort of at a crossroad here, where essentially the Europeans, they are left with no choice. They either have to comply with the American will, they have to sort of go the route of Donald Trump, which is a total 180 from what they were doing just a short time ago, or they're going to have to go at it alone with absolutely no possibility of emerging victorious in this conflict. So essentially now, they were saying on CNN, Macron, he's here representing France, but he's also representing the broader Europe, and he's here to sort of negotiate in place of Europe and try to bring the European perspective to the White House. And despite everything that he was saying and how conciliant he was with Donald Trump, you can clearly see that that's not the way it went, and as I was saying at the beginning, that Macron was saying very different things before he got to Washington than what he was saying in this press conference. you know, the answer that he got here was that you have clear marching orders now. You're gonna go out there. You're gonna go back to Europe, and you're gonna explain to your European counterparts that this war is over, and they have to somewhat manage to sell it, and they have to convince Zelensky to go along with it, because America is done with this war. And of course, now we're gonna see, you know, what happens. Because, you know, I don't think that Europe is going to decide to fly on its own on this one. Of course, we had the German elections yesterday, and the new prospective chancellor said that, you know, Europe needs to get its independence. He wants to have nuclear weapons now, and Europe is going to go alone and be its own force, and they're going to sort of show the rest of the world what they're capable of. But that's not going to happen overnight, definitely. And even in the medium term, it's probably not going to happen that much, when we're going to see what's going to be coming out in the next several years in terms of the economic impact that Europe is going to be facing with their energy crisis. And now they're essentially 100% dependent on either the US or Russia for their energy. So there's basically no way that the European economy can recover, and that Europe can spend tons of money, you know, to rearm themselves and be this independent militaristic force. And so now, for the, you know, foreseeable future, they're going to have to play along and manage to sort of, you know, find a way to, you know, have their own say in things, and, you know, ensure that they have some of the things that they want, while still going along with the will of Donald Trump, which is, of course, something that they absolutely do not want.
Hit me with that like, and sub to the channel. Hit me with that like, and click the effing bell. Click that bit, alright. The algo recommends for she don't like. The algo knows you well. Hit me with that like, subscribe to the channel. Hit me with that like, and click the effing bell.